colleagues, thank you so much. Jacques, we can start. Thank you. Okay, so you and I are going to have a conversation. It's really a conversation. I was still collecting some of this data last week still, so nothing has been analyzed. So don't expect any deep connections here. We're having a conversation. Like I said, this is the goal ahead of the colloquium, to really have conversations about different things. So of course, I'm speaking to you about orality and place naming in Northern Cape towns. And of course, that us a Noordkap ding, that bly nog 'n Noordkap ding. And rightfully so, I am Dr. Lorato Mokwena. I'm from the University of the Western Cape, part of the Linguistics department. And if any part of this presentation bothers you, you can email me. Of course, if you have any compliments, you can also email me. Right. So, Jacques, we can go. So, of course, I have to start by just housing this in a field. And if I can see my own slides. So, of course, the field that this work really belongs to, it's called Linguistic Landscape. And if you look to the right side, to your left, and what would, to your left, the definition of linguistic landscape really has always been talking about the visibility, what you can see, and of course what you can't see, the languages you can and cannot see, on public and commercial signs in a given territory, right? And so when those two authors, which are the people that they've popularized what the definition of linguistic landscape, when those authors came out, they really spoke about linguistic landscape consisting of the language on public road signs, advertising billboards, street names, place names, commercial shop signs, and public signs. So that is the type of things that they thought about when they spoke about linguistic landscape, right? And of course, as time went on, and of course, knowledge grows, we come to the other side where we said that Chahami and Gotha in 2009 really spoke about us moving beyond, right? We need to move beyond and look for other things that linguistic landscape can focus on. And of course, in 2009, they really said that linguistic landscape, so this was a move away from it being purely language, now has to focus on what they call interwoven discourses. So we have to think about what is seen, what is heard, what is spoken, and what is thought, right? And of course, then we're moving beyond just focusing on pure language. And they also spoke about the fact that all text situated in a changing public space, and this goes beyond written text of signs and include verbal text. And the reason, of course, why I highlighted all the verbal things is because this is where my current passion is really speaking about orality and thinking through how not everything is written. And I can assure you, not everything in the Northern Cape is written, right? And of course, these things include images, objects, placement in time and space, and as well as human beings. Human beings being very important because human beings are signage too, where a person is and how they look and how they feel in a specific environment also serves as a sign, right? And so we come here 2015 and we see that now linguistic landscape embraces the complexities of semiotic spaces as well as people as authors. And we always have to remember that in spaces, people exist in linguistic landscape spaces. So we can't study linguistic landscape without understanding what the people do in those spaces, right? Of course, actors and users, all of which is part of linguistic landscape analysis, right? Thank you, Jacques. Right, so I do a lot of work in Northern Cape, and I travel quite a lot, and I drive quite a lot in Northern Cape. And so I've realized the Northern Cape has a very tricky relationship with signage, right? So I'm going to show you a couple of pictures. Some confused, and all these things they were found in Northern Cape, right? So Jacques, the first click, right? Now, so I traveled to, now I forget where we went to. That was Nabe Pramberg. What is Nabe Pramberg? What town is Nabe Pramberg? You know those two mountains? The R Phillips town, Phillips Vale, all of those towns. I was around here, right? And so I get there and I see this picture. Now, 2 days, a couple of minutes before, I had a conversation with someone at the municipal office, and they were telling me they're really having a problem of people taking down the signs and using them for their own uses. So someone takes off what would look like to you and me a stop street, right? Takes it off, takes off the color, and writes whatever they want to write on it. Or what would look to you and I like a warning sign. Person just took it, turned it right around, and of course wrote there, if I can see it with you, geen toegang betrede sal vervolg word, which means no entrance. Trespassers will be prosecuted. There we go, right? So you see how in the Northern Cape now, sometimes we take the signs that are supposed to be next to the road and we use them on our gates, right? So that's the first way of how we repurpose written signage, right? The next one. Right. And so I went to the R. I was still in the R. So I'm there at the, okay, let me not say where I was, but I was there. And so I came across the sign. I don't want to get into trouble. I came across the sign. Now I want you to focus specifically in the one that's written in red. But say, eet verboden. Oortreders sal vervolg word. Now I want you to understand the confusion in the sign. Now I don't know whether you're not allowed to eat at all or whether you're not allowed to eat there, exactly where the sign is placed, right? So besides the fact that right of admission is reserved, which means you need permission to get in here, you also cannot either eat when you're in there or you can't eat where you're standing, right? So you also find that sometimes when we write written signage, we write it like we talk. We didn't think through what the other person would be thinking through when they read this. And I can promise you, as many examples will show you, right there where it says eet verboden, there were people eating, right? So the next one, please. Right. And then I was driving into Douglas. And so I came across this sign, and this is another common thing that happens in Northern Cape, vandalism. A lot of vandalism happens with signage, written signage. So you will see there, I hope it's clear, there's a line, a black line right through the name of the district municipality. So I went and I asked the people at those offices, did you see the sign? There's something wrong with the sign. They were like, yeah, we saw it, but we don't know what happened there. So they were like, a secret for apartheid. I'm like, oh, well, but it happens though, right? So you see that there's a tricky relationship with written signage in Northern Cape, but I'm not done. There's other examples. Jacques? Right. Now, this is in Kimberley. So I was driving around in Kimberley, and so that sign right there is actually a sign. I think it points to, if you stand in front of it, the real sign reads something else on it. But can you see the car wash in the back? Yeah. So the car wash thought this would serve as a great advertising board for them. So the sign literally is almost down, but they thought, you know what, we can just write car wash and people turning will see that as a car wash, right? So this is the tricky relationship with written signage in the Northern Cape. Thank you, Jacques. Now this one. So I decided to go to Platfontein for personal reasons, and because I'm from Delport, every time I drive past this sign, I always assume if I turn into that space, I will find Platfontein, which is a lie. So I drove in there and I got there and I was like, I'm looking for this person. And they were like, no, you are looking for Platfontein, the township. So I said, the board says Platfontein. They're like, no. I think that's the game reserve area or something. What you're looking for is further down. And so I got to where I was going further down. No, fragments, no remains. How am I going to know where I must go? Again, the linguist in me, I always want to see things. Person is like, no. That's a porky. That's a porky. Now I'm getting excited because it means I'm going to read so I will know.
Yeah.
No, you're not coming down. And I'm like, that's a porky. En die oom sê toe vir my se witbord, niks is geskryf. Jy sal hom sien. When I get there, en letterlik, niks is geskryf. And so I'm very confused because I'm just like, what happened to the Platfontein sign that was on the R31 now, and why can't this one be written as clearly as the other one, right? So the point I'm trying to make with all of these different pictures that I really sometimes find hilarious about signage in the Northern Cape is that sometimes signage, written things can go wrong, right? They can be misunderstood, like eet verboden, don't eat here, or don't eat outside, or don't eat at all, right? But also there's this element of signs not being maintained, and sometimes just being vandalized, right? So now the conversation I want you and I to have, if this is the type of relationship that Northern Capers have with signage, right, that is not always available, that you can't always, is it me? Okay, that you can't always see clearly. What do people in the Northern Cape then do to get over this hurdle, right? And so the first one, so what you and I are going to talk about is orality and place naming. And I didn't want this to be a very deeply academically inclined presentation, but you know, that's moeilijk om die boom, jy kan die ape die boom down, but jy kan nie die boom die ape dali. I'm an academic, right? So I had to put this here so we have some context for us to understand, right? So Karen and Berg really speak about the fact that place names are not always inscribed on maps. They aren't always inscribed on maps. They're not written on maps or within the landscape on signs, right? They are also most frequently spoken. And I've come to understand while I was doing the work in Northern Cape and while I was doing the work on linguistic landscape, that there's an element missing about us not talking about what happens when we don't have a sign. What happens when on say, if you want to go to Romario's house, you see the double story there on the corner, that fingers. There, if you get to that fingers, if you turn left, because that is how our people speak, right? So this is within the framework that we are sort of claiming and the conceptualizing and the thinking that we are placing the, sort of this presentation. Right? So the first thing you and I are going to speak about and what was given in the abstract is really this oral preservation of unofficial languages. Now this is when I traveled to sadly so to Namakwaland, and I'll never forget. I was very oblivious, you know. It was nice being a neutral researcher, I guess. Before I got to Namakwaland, and I realized, we're doing something a bit wrong, right? And so I'll never forget. I'm sitting with Petrus, and I'm speaking from Petrus about written signage, and to far from Petrus, I'm like, Petrus, is there Nama on the signage? And Petrus is possibly impaired. And he said to me, no. And I asked, why not? And I asked him in a genuine sense, but why not? And he said, it's because it's not an official language. And I was embarrassed, first of all, I really was. But most importantly, I was really disappointed, and my heart was so. Because here is this language that people speak. And here is this language that many people know, but it is not, because it's not an official language. It's not on any official signage. So this sign for me, and this is what is in front of your booklet, it's very confusing for me, but also it's very sad, because we're missing languages there, and they need to get there. And I hope that and so I asked Petrus, do you know of where I can find the sign where Nama is written on it? And so Petrus said to me, if I go to a monument, I forget it now, it's round. It's round. It's in, is it in Springbok? I could be wrong, but that's the only place you will visibly see Nama in that part of the world, and it was said. And so I look at this welcome sign, and I was listening to Peter, and I was listening to Bradley, and I listened to the premier yesterday, and I think it's time we do something about this sign, because this sign does not represent what we are for. The sign is not inclusive. It's missing a couple of people, and the people that it's missing are the people that should have first been placed there before we place all those other languages there. Right? So for me, this is the type of work that I do. And when I realized, when I left Namakwaland, I was like, it's a Mayat Bakker geword, because I realized something, we are off of it. But then I also realized that what happens is that there's an oral preservation of unofficial languages. And this is what we heard today when Bradley was addressing us. But also this is what I heard from Petrus when I was speaking. This is what I heard when I was speaking to Auntie Maggie Ali when I was in Uppington. So there's this oral preservation, but at some point, like I was saying last night, because our elders are dying out, we need to move from a point where we orally preserve, especially languages, to a point where we write them down. So if written signage fails us, like this one fails us, we know that there's an oral preservation of languages that definitely happens in the Northern Cape, right? So that is the first one. And now this one, there's also this thing where if written signage does not work out for us, or we generally just people like ignoring written signage always, let's be very clear, right? People tend to maintain an oral, an official naming system. The first example I will give you is of perseverance. Who does not know in Kimberley where perseverance is? Perseverance is not called perseverance anymore. Perseverance is where the Northern Cape Education Department is. But when people give you directions, I was given directions 2 days ago. Someone said, Ajibe perseverance come. And I was like, it's not perseverance anymore. But because people have these things in their memory, just because you put a different sign saying, oh, this is not Northern Cape Education Department. No, it's perseverance. It was perseverance and it will stay perseverance. Just like, you know, Soplaiki has now incorporated William Bescott into, you know, it's called William Bescott. It's all like it's a university. No, it's actually just William Bescott, right? So you find that things stay in people's memories, right? And then of course there's the one that so I have examples of the Northern Cape, and I'll just, if I skip some, bear with me. I'm just mindful of our time together, right? And so also we have the one called 1 mile in Alco, where really 1 mile is 1 mile is not 1 mile. In fact, no, South Africans do not refer to things as miles. We speak to things in kilometers. But what happens is that 1 mile is actually a hitchhiking spot. That's what 1 mile is. But it's tricky because if you tell a person from America, this place is called 1 mile, somewhere this person would expect from where it is to wherever it ends to be a mile. And it's not, it's 3 kilometers. A mile is not that long, right? So you have this oral maintenance, right, of places where the locals know it. And and trust me, when a local, this was perseverance, I was like, what if another person came and never knew where perseverance was? So you also find that with this oral maintenance of names, there's also this very locality within it, right? And of course, there's Speedy Gray, all of Kimberley's taxi stops, all of them, there's no written signage, none of them. Mine was Speedy Gray when I used to still stay with my grandmother at the corner of sort of Sinchwaring and Mudise. And I always, who's Speedy Gray? No, just say Speedy Gray and get off. But who is Speedy Gray? So you find that even with the taxis, right, there's this oral maintenance of taxi stops, and they just get added as the places go on. And of course, this is a very sad example. I went to Bridgetown and I asked for a numnam for Bridgetown. And they told me Bridgetown is called Breekiris. And I was like, no, what does that mean? And they were like, "Daar gaan niks hier aan nie. Ons is gebreek. Die plek is gebreek." And it was sad, because what tends to happen is when we drive past, I'm passing Bridgetown, and the people sitting in the place don't recognize it as Bridgetown. It sounds very fancy when you call it the town. But when you call it Breekiris, to sort of associate it with this place that has nothing left, a place that is broken down, a place of hopelessness where the youth do not know what to do with themselves. So you see that you have this official signage that would be written Bridgetown, but the oral name really speaks to the sort of real reality of the place, right? So these are some of the examples of how people sort of also use them. Let me just get to my thought. Use the sort of naming of places and what happens in the place, what happened and what happens, to maintain an oral system of the place, right? And of course, part of all of this also includes the preservation of the social cultural background of places. I have a couple of examples there. I will tell you two that I recently came across. Bonnie's Park is in Campbell. I encountered that last week. In a nutshell, Bonnie is a brave woman. Bonnie went back and repossessed land, and they took Bonnie to court. Full name is Kidi Bonnie. Was taken to court and all of those, and Bonnie was like, instead of me renting places, I'm gonna put up my shack here, and then if you guys want to remove me, you can, but I know I'm protected by the law. It's a beautiful story. I spoke to her last week, and that park is now called Bonnie's Park. So you also see how oral naming of places preserves sort of the socio-cultural background of places, right? And of course, then I have Scandal. So Scandal is where Day Hospital is. Day Hospital is here. Scandal is somewhere there. Now, I would not have known Scandal exists if someone, I had passed and I asked, what is Diplexenum? And someone said, Diplexenum is Scandal. And I'm like, Bapa Yena. And then I Diplex, W Jojo Tank, the Hill Jojo Tank, a Scandal. And I was like, what is Diplexenum Scandal? And they're like, my sister, and I man stop so voorbij. My sister, daar gaan klom goede daaraan. And I thought, And so in my head, I thought, daar gaan zeker scandalous goed aan. Like my sister gave a livity, gave a rare livity. And so stop me over by. And so you find that what happens is that the place doesn't have a name. But what people do is whatever happens there, they just take up and they orally maintain that name. And I was like, surely you didn't call the place Scandal. Come on, there was a better name. They were like, Diplex and Nam, a Scandal. And I overstrut, no, he was really proud from being from Scandal. No? So just put that out there too. And of course, we have Matromula, which I also encountered a couple of days ago in Griquastad. When I first heard the name of the place, I was shocked. In fact, I was sad. Matromula means, I need to find the English word. Matromula means, the Afrikaanse word is hartseer. There's a deeper type of hartseer that you have. Matromula means give me a word. It's not grief as a deep hartseer. It's almost as if there's it's like when there's hartseer, but there's also this deep level of it's just sadness, and it's just, and so I was like, why would you call a place that way? And so this guy got really he got really emotional, and he said to my sister, it's because of the type of way our parents live. So my is sort of suffering that takes place. And he spoke about the fact that they called the place that way. It was first called Itirileng, and now it's called Matromula, because of the suffering that people endured during that time, right? And I looked at him and I could really see that there was this trauma, right? And this pain within him. And I was like, I understand. But you see, you would not know if you don't ask someone, but why would you call places this name? So what I'm going to do, I'm going to skip and ask Jacques to go to the next slide. And so what you also find if you go to the Northern Cape, and I always ask this question, now who told Kimberley to be Kimberley? Why is Campbell called Campbell? These places sound very English to me. And so I spent, when I was standing opposite one of my participants, the person said to me, Kimberley's name is not Kimberley. Kimberley's name is Fourie. That was Kimberley's name. And so if you find, the Northern Cape has a very colloquial, there's a lot of very colonial toponyms. Its places is very named after very colonial people, and we don't always know how we relate to them and why we relate to them. So I went to Smutsdrup and I asked, why is the place called Smutsdrup? And I know this sounds like people give me this look, a Smutsdrup. And I'm like, yeah, I know that. But why is it called Smutsdrup? Because the question here is, do you know the history attached to the name that you would keep repeating it over and over and over again? Do you know who Batli was? Do you know who Delphar was? Or are we just going on and repeating these names without looking about how these names came about? And most importantly, whether we can change these names and find out what our Urmensa call these things so we can put it back into the landscape, right? Otherwise, the landscape just looks very white. And that's a Campbell, and that's a Kimberley, and that's a Hurtstown. And you just like, this does not make any sense, right? So I went through and this is my closing. Like I said, it's really a conversation. And I found that the Northern Cape generally has a lot of very colloquial toponyms. But what's also interesting is that people think there's nothing in a name. Names are very important, because when the colonizers came, they're like, you call it Fourie itself. No, I actually have a chief of whatever that is going to give the money and whatever, so I'm just going to call it Kimberley. And now the problem with all of that is that name stays. And it stays for forever and ever, and we don't go back. And we don't realize that that was part of the possession. that was part of taking away what was ours. So without sounding too political, I was watching myself here, right? Of course, naming was never a neutral exercise, and I think we can all account to this. And of course, what happened then was when all of these colonizers came, that the natives were assumed to lack a history worth of celebrating and preserving, which is a lie. It's a lie, right? And so what happened? So the names that were given to our places were really just a way of a takeover, right? Thank you, Jacques. And so where we find ourselves now is that what also happens, these corrupted names, where when you hear the proper spelling of the name, and then when you see how it should be spelled, but then it was sort of changed to English so that it's sort of easier to pronounce and easier to write. You also find that a lot in the Northern Cape landscape, especially in Namakwa. And I'll never forget, we were standing at the library, and I think there was supposed to be an Uitroepteken in the name of the library. So Kara is what, Jacob? Do you remember? Yeah, yeah. And so the Uitroepteken, the exclamation mark was not there. And I said, where's the exclamation mark? And they were like, they didn't put it in. I'm like, why not? Isn't that the name? And they're like, well, they didn't put it in. I'm like, send it back. Tell them to bring it back. And that's when I also realized that signage is expensive. And so what people do, they take the easy way out. So you find all of these corrupted names. And okay, not corruption in terms of like stealing money, but corrupted in terms of misrepresentation of the language and of the people. So you also find a lot of different examples of that in the Northern Cape. And then of course, what you also find is that because we are who we are in the word captain, some of us really do not care. We just continue with the names of perseverance. We just continue with these normal. I remember I was in Uppington and I asked someone, what was the name of Uppington? And I forget it now, but someone gave me the correct name of Uppington. And every time I used the word Uppington, the person corrected me and said, it's not Uppington, it's the other one, right? And I remember I was in Campbell and someone was like, but it's Knoffelvallei. I'm like, oh, it was called Knoffelvallei, no, but it's Knoffelvallei. So you find that there is, we know the oral names. We have these names, but they're not used because what happens is that so you find that in the Northern Cape, there's this result of these two sets. You have the one that is codified and backed and like written on all the official documents, written on all the written signages, but you also have the one that is not written and it's really reinforced by the indigenous cultures and it's orally maintained, right? And this really for me is a form of resistance. And this is the type of work that I'm interested in, where we found this way, regardless of what the signage shape, this is what I'm going to call it. Thank you, Jacques. I'm done.